It's always a little awkward following up the baby because when the baby comes, everyone's like, oh my gosh. And then when the preacher comes up, it's like him again, you know? No, good morning. Also, the youth group, Catapult, are you in here? What's up? If we could take our Bibles and turn to the book of 1 John chapter 2. You know, if you're joining us for the first time, I really want to welcome you. Our church, we're currently in a series in the book of 1 John called Blessed Assurance, where we're trying to gain certainty of what Christians can believe in. And you know, if you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, what we've really been learning from Pastor Steve is what Christians ought to do, what our calling is, namely, that's to love God, of course, but also to love others, not just in a natural way, but in a supernatural way, a love that comes from God. But if what we've been learning the past few weeks is what Christians should love, namely others, this morning we're actually going to go in the exact reversal and talk about what Christians should not love. Now, right off the bat, that might feel a little bit counterintuitive for us. Because when we think about the Christian, we're always talking about love, aren't we? Oh, Christians should love God. Oh, Christians should love others and love. And so for us to talk about something we should not love almost feels like a kind of like an imbalancing statement, right? It kind of throws us off a little bit. But logically, just from the get-go, we must believe and kind of accept that if we truly love something, or someone, logically, consequently, subsequently, it actually kind of invites no love for something else, right? So if you love life, if you love the concept of life, you will subsequently not love the concept of murder. If you love the concept of freedom, you will subsequently not love the concept of slavery. If you love the Los Angeles Dodgers, you currently do not love the Houston Astros, but we're not going to talk about that right now. And so for the Christian, because we've already been invited into this amazing calling to love God and love other people, it also invites us, and John does, he kind of invites us as well, to not love something, and here it is, namely the world. Here's how John puts it, if you look with me in chapter 2, verse 15. John writes, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father or their love for God is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, it's not from the Father, but it's from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. And so, you know, when we kind of boil down this passage to its essence, John is simply commanding believers, don't love the world. When he says love, when we kind of press down into the translation, what he actually means is don't have high esteem. Don't find such satisfaction in. You know, don't indulge in so much. Don't take such pleasure in the world. Now, what exactly is the world, though? Right? And you know, one thing that's difficult is the world, or the Greek word cosmos, it has various senses, nuances in how it can be applied and understood. On the one hand, the world or cosmos, it could be a translation for earth, geographical, physical. Another sense of cosmos is human beings. Right? It's not the earth, but it's the very people who dwell in and dwell on the earth. Now, these two senses, when we apply to the context, it doesn't seem to fit the context, right? Because after all, God created the earth, and he saw that it was good. God also commands us to love our neighbors, which are people. So there must be a different sense or a nuanced understanding of cosmos that John is pushing for, and there is. The idea that John is pushing for when he uses the word world is fallen value systems. Fallen value systems. It's any values or system of thinking, an order of thinking, behaving, buying into, living out, carrying out anything and all that is either in opposition of God or autonomous, excludes God. So any type of like thinking, any type of value system that says, no, I don't want anything to do with God. I want to be on my own, this prideful independence, or, like I can do my own thing. I want God out of the picture. So any kind of value system that's tries to get God out of the picture, that's the kind of fallen value system and order and system of thinking and living that John is pushing for. And so what John is saying is, hey, don't indulge in this fallen value system that opposes and excludes God. Now, right off the bat, I don't know if there's a single person here who would disagree with that. Because, for example, if there's a non-Christian here, and I'm so glad you're here, even the non-Christian in this room is like, yeah, like that makes sense. If you're a Christian and you love God, you probably shouldn't find pleasure and indulge in that which opposes God, right? So logically, it's easy to connect the dots. And even for us, some of us who kind of grew up in the church, we agree with this, right? That's why you hear certain vernacular in the church, right? You hear things like, don't be a worldly Christian. Right? We think, that Christian is so worldly. And so when John commands, do not indulge in the world, this fallen value system, there is hardly anyone, if anyone at all, who's going to have a hard time connecting the dots and finding this agreeable. But I wonder if where we might have a harder time connecting the dots is not whether the Christian should love the world, but maybe what the world exactly looks like and manifests itself to be. You see, I think often when Christians talk about not loving the world, we describe this fallen value system as if it's something like out there, right? As if it takes shape primarily in various cultural forms or subcultural forms. And as long as we don't participate in certain cultural forms, then we're not a part of the world. We don't love the world. And so often when we talk about loving the world, it's just something kind of out there and not something closer here, a buying into of corruption and corrosion in terms of our attitude before God. Like, here's what I mean. Like, if you kind of talk to a Christian, you ask them, like, describe to me a worldly Christian, and you kind of keep pushing that question, the average person in the church, they will actually start describing these cultural forms and subcultural forms, right? So for example, for some of us, when I said the world, don't love the world, here's where our mind immediately went to. Here's what you think about, the cultural form you think about when you think about the world. Some of us, not all of us, but some of us, we think about like the nightclub scene, right? It's like dark, it's lidded, not like this room, okay? But it's dark and it's not very well lit, and there's all this loud music, and there's these people like kind of dancing around and having a good time, and a guy kind of whispering into a girl's ear without invading her private space too much. And there's like this back room. And behind the back room, there are these guys kind of sitting in a circle, and they have a cigar and drink, and they're playing these cards. So for some of us, not all of us, when we think about the world, that's what we think about. And so the idea of a Christian participating in those things, for some of us, when we think about a Christian actually doing those things, we're like, oh my goodness, come Lord Jesus. The world is coming to an end, right? Others of us, we don't think about the world in terms of the nightclub scene. What we think about is the cultural form of success and wealth. Like your mind, you think about that person in the really nice suit, who's very entrepreneurial, who does crazy business deals and reels in a lot of money. And so for you, if there's a Christian who's very successful, right, we think, he's so ambitious. As if that's the problem, right? He's so ambitious, doing so many money deals. Boy, he sure must like his lifestyle. Or we think about the person who's really passionate about his or her career. And we think, no balance. I feel bad for their children. And so we actually think about like success, cultural forms. Others of us, when we think about the world, the cultural form or subculture form that we think about is the culture of fashion, vacationing, or entertainment, right? That's why some of us, we actually go, oh my gosh, that Christian couple, they're vacationing again? They're traveling to Europe again? How much money is that? I sure hope they're tithing. Oh boy. Or some of us, right, we think about a Christian who has this purse, and we go, that Louis must be a big deal. Or that Jimmy guy, I don't know who this Tory is, but Miss Birch, she must be a big deal. Sure hope they're tithing. Or others of us, we think about a certain Christian, we're like, how do they watch all those TV shows? They just know all the TV shows. Okay, I mean, if they're that kind of a Christian, if they're into those things, and so what we start doing is we start kind of distancing ourselves from the conversation because we think that the world is just a corruption of subculture, something external. Now, to be sure, that very well may be the case because all cultural forms, they find expression from values underneath. However, I think we have to be careful now to not simply point fingers at an external cultural form as if it's something out there and not our own buy-in and belief of values that have been corrupted, values of corrosion that we've actually bought into in here, in our hearts, which is much more closer. But it's very subtle, almost sinister. We can't really tell, it's sneaky. You know how I know this and why I think this? See, I so appreciate how John, clearly he was a wise man. Because though he could have simply said, don't love the world and moved on, he actually starts getting a little bit descriptive of what precisely is in the world. Because the devil is in the details, right? And so there's three things that John lists in terms of how a system of fallen values kind of reveal itself to be, how exclusion of God and autonomy, how it kind of shows itself. He lists three things that we're gonna talk about. The first one is the desires of the flesh. The second one is the desire of the eyes. And the third one is the pride of life. And as we unpack these things, we might discover that maybe our love for the world is much more in here, even if our own subcultures seem spiritual and clean cut and tidy and family oriented. So let's start with the desire of the flesh. The desire of the flesh, for those of us taking notes, or the lust of the flesh, it really means to be driven by our physical appetites. To be driven by or to be controlled by our physical appetites, which whether it's our palates, it could be physical, or sensual or sexual, but it's really to be controlled in a way where what we're really after is just simply just satisfying our body. Now, that's the problem with sexual immorality, right? Because sexual immorality, it elevates like sexual pleasure to godlike status, as if that's simply what our bodies exist for, just to feel sexual pleasure. But the problem with that is it excludes God. It opposes God. That's why it's worldly. That's why sexual immorality is wrong. That's why it's sinful. But if we're going to talk about sexual immorality in those terms, you know what else is kind of worldly? You know what else is kind of the desire of the flesh? Gluttony. Excess food. Now, that's something we don't talk about often in the church. Now, everyone's nervous. Confession time. Food is good. If you've never had it, it's okay. Like you should eat it. I love food. I'm not one of those food is only fuel guys. I'm big into flavor. Steak. I'm totally there. Love food. And I think it's okay so if you're a foodie, rock on, okay? But I'm just saying, actually, in fact, the Bible, it talks about, so many redemptive moments, historical moments, food is in the picture. In the Bible, food is a major theme in the Bible, right? We absolutely can glorify God whether we eat or drink, right? But if we're honest, sometimes aren't our lives controlled by food maybe a little bit more than it should be? Because like Paul, he says things like, I beat my body into submission. I don't let anything control me. Like there are times when I go, did I just really reorient my entire schedule for wings again this week? Right? I didn't share this first service because my wife was here, but I one time, and the first one's recorded, I think. So one time I picked up my kids from school and I went through drive-through at McDonald's and I parked in the parking lot and I ate by myself while the kids were in the back. And I'm not gonna give them McDonald's. I'm not a bad dad. That's so unhealthy. Don't get all this judgment. Wow. I'm gonna sacrifice my own body. No, but really, and sometimes like, what are we having for dinner? Fish. Oh, fish. Like, I hate fish. What I'm really craving is, and when I get really hungry, I get angry. That's why we have the term hangry, because it combines anger and hunger, right? When I get hangry, even my kids are like, Dad, stop acting like a child, right? It's just this weird relationship where I just wonder sometimes if I allow my body to be too controlled by excess food. And I know some of us were like, but you're like small, you're skinny. It's the skinny dudes who can pound food, right? No, I'm not saying you can't crave food. I'm not saying you can't, we should enjoy food to the glory of God. In fact, today's a rainy day, so we should have pho. I'm just, right. Pho sales are gonna go up today, right? No, it's fine, but I'm just saying, are we too controlled by food? Is our relationship in terms of our body and food, is God's glory even in the picture? Like, do we eat to live, or are we just living to eat? Because there's a huge difference. Let me ask you this. When you think about Sodom and Gomorrah, what sins do you think of? See, we think about sexual sin. But Ezekiel 16 talks about Sodom and says, here was the fault of Sodom: pride and excess food. Gluttony. That's the lust of the flesh. That's the first thing. We're like, the first thing, there's more. The second thing that John lists in terms of what's in the world is the desires of the eyes. Now, the desires of the eyes, for those of us taking notes, it's really to see the external without noticing the inherent and intrinsic value. And so that's problematic, right? So for example, like pornography, that's why pornography is so devastating. And Catapult, I know you're in here, okay? You know why it's so devastating? It's because it's dehumanizing. It boils down people just to bodies. And we don't see people created in the image of God who need Jesus. That's why pornography is so hurtful. Because it excludes and opposes the values of God in terms of how God has fashioned people in his own image. But now, can we just be honest? Don't we do that in all sorts of different spheres as well? For example, like sports. The Dodgers. But again, we're not going to talk about that today. But have you noticed sometimes the way that even Christians talk about athletes? Right? That guy sucks. Trade that guy. Now, some players must be traded out of a team. I agree with that. I agree. No, so in terms of if the goal of sports is to win, I understand that. But isn't it interesting how when we see athletes, we merely see the external in terms of they simply exist for this athletic kind of performance, just for our viewing pleasure. They are not people made in the image of God. Isn't that kind of oddly similar, even in terms of, at the heart of it, what pornography is? Or how about this? Like, think about the way that we talk about our employers or employees, right? Some of us, I hate my boss. Worst boss ever. That might be true. He may be the worst boss ever. She may be the worst boss ever. But do we see our boss made in the image of God? Do we see the intrinsic value that God has placed in that person by virtue of creating that person? Or how about, this employee, like, they're terrible. I'm gonna fire them. You may need to. That might be the right move. But in so doing, do we also see them as people? One of the things that I thought was so interesting, if you remember Charlottesville, the whole issue on racism. And when I saw the videos and the articles coming out, I always take time to read some of the comments. And I shouldn't do that because it poisons my heart, right? It makes me depressed. And something that I noticed was that when people saw these videos of these people exercising racism, there was a huge outcry that racism is terrible because it dehumanizes other people, and I totally agree. But some of the very people who were crying out against racism, the very things they were saying about racists, you know what we should do to these people? It was just as dehumanizing. And so, often we can talk about the desire of the eyes as if it's something just terrible out there, but even the way that we talk about it here. The third thing that John talks about and lists is the pride of life. The pride of life is to really glory in one's possessions and positions. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with having a great house. We know that, right? There's nothing wrong with those things. There isn't. There's nothing wrong with having a high status in society. It's fine. It just becomes problematic when we put so much of our identity and hope and glory into those things that God almost becomes an obstacle, right? The moment God starts feeling like a threat to our life, the moment God starts feeling like, okay, he's making me nervous now, that's if we're trying to exclude God on account of our positions and possessions, that's when we're exercising the pride of life. And so that's why, like the rich young ruler, he loved money too much. Because Jesus said, you can have me. Just sell it. You can have me. And he couldn't. Jesus was too great a threat to his possessions. But now, if we can bring it down closer, I'm a parent. So I speak out of my own wrestlings of a dad. I have two beautiful children, sometimes scary. But can I just be honest? For all the rhetoric that I say about my children belong to the Lord, Elizabeth, read a baby dedication here. For all the rhetoric that I say out loud, can we just be honest? Sometimes, isn't it kind of scary the thought of what God could do with our children? Sometimes. Like really, I'm gonna give full control to God. I am gonna be responsible, but God, ultimately your will win out. So sometimes, I share this first service. I love I glory in them. They're so much to me. But sometimes God makes me nervous. I'm not sure. Now for others of us who are younger, we're like, I don't have children. Okay, so let's talk about status a little bit. Because some of us, we may not be working, but in our digital space, our Instagram filters, our Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it is, it's kind of a means to glory in ourselves, isn't it? I joked around that Snapchat, it's our personal TV stations. That's what it is. We're just showing our life. Have you noticed sometimes, like, you put something on Instagram and you're like, what? 8 likes in 20 minutes? What? That's it? Like, I'm gonna take it down. It's embarrassing, right? 40 likes? That's it? Oh my gosh. And so at that moment, God's opinion of us does not even matter. It's all about the opinions of those around us or what the digital space has to say about us. It's the pride of life. So yes, the world could be cultural forms out there, but it is also when we enjoy and delight and pleasure in values that have been corrupted, that exclude God, when we embrace those things in here. And it can look very spiritual and clean and proper, and we could still be loving the world. You see, John, he's so wise, and it's so insightful. You know why? Because when John, he wrote this letter to the churches of Asia Minor, some of these churches, like the members were very not wealthy. They were very poor, some of them. It was also a time of immense persecution, right? And so if there's a group of believers where you have to write, don't love the world, I would not have picked the churches of Asia Minor, right? Like, why? They're dying for their faith. They're so poor. But yet, in the book of 1 John, there are 10 imperatives, meaning there are 10 commandments. chronologically, the first imperative that shows up is don't love the world. Because it's not just something out there, it's something much closer here. You know, what's funny is that as I've been preparing for the sermon, what I generally do is if I know what passage I'm preaching on, like a month out, I'll just start reading it and just sit on it and stew on it. And you know, just totally being honest, the first time I read this, I was like, oh, I preached, this is easy. This is for the people who drink too much. This is for the people who are sleeping around. It's the people who love their money. Got it. You're like, whoa. But to be totally honest, as each week passed, I actually started feeling a little bit more uncomfortable. It actually became a little bit harder to preach this. And you know, there are certain sermons where I get really excited to preach about. And then there are other sermons where I'm like, what's even going inside here? Because what I've discovered is sometimes I indulge in the world a lot more than I care to admit. Could I ask you a question? How much do you love the world? You notice I didn't ask you if you love the world. I asked, how much do you love the world? How much do we indulge and esteem highly? You know, where do we go from here? Now, one of the solutions may be that, well, you need to pursue Jesus, and that is true. You must see him in his beauty. But what's fascinating is John doesn't do that. You know what John does? He completes the picture of the world. See, we actually must see the world for what it truly is. There are two things we must see. Here they are. The first thing is that we must see the world's lack of longevity in light of forever. We must see the world's lack of longevity in light of forever. See, in verse 17, John writes, and the world is passing away along with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever. So what he's saying is, look, this value system, as enjoyable as it may appear to be, it's temporary. It's fading away. It's gonna pass. Don't invest in that. Eternity is here. That's forever. That's worth it. Maybe I can try to illustrate this. Do you guys remember dumb phones? Dumb phones are basically not smartphones. It's the ones where you have to, okay, sorry. I tried to find one, and I realized I had to go to a museum. No. You know, in fact, here's how unfamiliar some of us are with dumb phones. There's this college student that I asked, hey, do you have a dumb phone I could use for a sermon illustration? He's like, yeah, I got one, I'll bring it. You know what he brought? He brought a smartphone that doesn't work. That's how removed. Come, Lord Jesus. I remember when the smartphone age broke into fallen humanity. Like, I used to have a dumb phone. I remember when the first iPhone came out. And it's really funny because there's someone I know who's kind of near and dear in my life. He went to the Apple store, because you know you can play with the products. He stood there for an hour playing with the iPhone, and you know what he kept saying? This is the future. This is the future. Yeah, creepy, right? See, at that moment, what he was saying was, this is what's really gonna matter. Like the dumb phone era, it's coming to an end. And in fact, NBC in 2016, they produced this article, right, called, is dumb phone making a comeback? And when you read it, you know what the findings are? No, they're not. In fact, what they say is, in a decade, this was written in 2016, in a decade, all dumb phones, it'll cease. Just like how the DVD has replaced the VCR. And I know some of us were like, what's a VCR? You know, is that a dinosaur? It's coming to an end. So what would you think if I told you I'm gonna invest in a dumb phone company? What would you think of me? In fact, if there was a church social gathering and you saw me in a corner, really distracted, and you're like, what is he doing on his smartphone? And you got closer, and I was holding my dumb phone really intensely and enjoying it, what would you think? You would think that's just, it's worthless. It's passing away. It's a bad investment. Why would you do that? the world in light of eternity, it's a bad investment. It's passing away. It's not worth it. But here's the problem. Even though we know that, it still feels good. That's the problem. We don't have a problem admitting that, but the problem is, even if it's temporary, can I just still enjoy it? That's the problem, right? So here's the second thing we must see. We must see the world's lack of generosity in light of the Father's. Going back to the silly illustration about the phones, can I just be honest? The first time I got my dumb phone, I thought it was amazing. I was like, I can call someone without a landline. I can text whoever I want. I can play Snake, Tetris, video game industry, look out, right? And then the first time I got my iPhone, I was like, wow, this dumb phone's totally dripped me. See, the world looks, it appears to give so much, doesn't it? The desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride of it looks really good on the outside. But see, there's actually a hollowness. There's an emptiness. It really doesn't give life. You know how I know this? Because of some of the most successful, rich people who get all of it, and there's the emptiness and the hollowness in their eyes. Comedian Jim Carrey, some of us, Jim Carrey was the Will Ferrell of the previous generation. Okay, for those who are like, Jim who? Here's what Jim Carrey said. Jim Carrey said, I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer. There's a hollowness to the world. It appears to be generous, but in fact, it just takes. It ruins. It destroys. But now think about the Father for a moment. Think about God the Father. Is not the Father generous? What does the Father give? Himself. You know, God the Father gives you himself in his perfection, in his glory, in his love and compassion and kindness for you. And it's a compassion that's stubborn. He will not quit on you. He gave us his Son. He gave us Jesus. And his Son was crushed on the cross for your sins and mine. And Jesus takes our punishment. Jesus does that for us. And then when we place our faith in him, God gives us, he places himself inside of us in the Holy Spirit. And then he brings us to his people, the church. And he says, these are the people you're gonna walk with through all the highs of life, through all the lows, all the difficult transitions. You're gonna be together. And I'm gonna carry you all the way into eternity, and that's when the party's really gonna get started. Isn't the Father generous? Isn't he so generous? You know, I don't know how many membership interviews I've done, right? And I love membership interviews because I get to hear people's stories. I get to see what God is doing in people's lives. Now, I love all the stories, but some of the stories that really warm my heart, you know what they are? They're the ones where Christians say, yeah, I grew up in the church, I met Jesus, and then I walked away from the church. And after walking away, I came back. Because you know what they're saying? They're saying, I tried it. I tried the world. And it wasn't enough. They didn't give me what I thought the world would give. And so I love those interviews where they're sitting, they're saying, it's so great because God's love, it's amazing. They'll say things like, it's crazy. He never gives up. They're so grateful. We must see the world's lack of generosity in light of the Father's immense generosity. You know, like, God the Father is not trying to rob you of good. He's not trying to keep you from pleasure. He is, in fact, trying to save you from that which will truly rob you of joy, and that's the world. And that's why he invites you and I to himself again and again and again. Living Hope, church, do not love the world. Do not love the world. It is passing away. It is not worth it. It is not a good investment. But Living Hope Church, let's love the Father because he is generous. And those who do his will be with him forever. Forever. He is worth it. Let's pray.